Hey, it's Tom Jordan. Hey, I really want to emphasize something here, and I want to demonstrate how dire and how real the Afghanistan crisis is for Americans, you and me, and why this matters. In a moment, I'm going to be speaking with an American who, for several months, has tried to bring his wife and his son back here to the United States. He was just with them in Afghanistan earlier this year. And now he's been trying, he came back and he's been trying to bring them back, but he's been roadblocked essentially the entire process. And now you know the situation in Afghanistan. His State Department, my State Department, the U.S. State Department, pretty much blocked him the entire time. They sent his wife and his son with promises to bring them out of Afghanistan. And as things ramped up, and in particularly after the Taliban took control, they promised to rescue them. They sent them coordinates to show up to these coordinates. Sounds like a movie, but this is what really happened. Show up to this coordinate at this time, and they would. And they would get there early and they would stay late. 14, 15, 16 hours would pass. Nobody would ever show up. And these are dangerous zones in Afghanistan. The promise helped, and the rescue never showed up time and time again. His wife and his baby boy, he's got a 3-month-old boy, they have been beaten. I think he's 3 months. Is about that. He's born in the spring, I think May. They've been beaten. They've been shot over with machine gun fire. They have been shoved and pushed back from the Kabul airport. All the while, and you've probably seen this, President Joe Biden, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Press Secretary Jen Psaki, they kind of gaslighted the entire situation. They gaslighted people like him and portrayed the airlift as an unprecedented success, while at the same time, possibly thousands of Americans and definitely thousands of Afghanis who fought against the Taliban and really helped Americans, helped our U.S. forces for many years. They've been left behind, and they are now high-level targets, including this traumatized wife and this little infant boy who are currently right now running from house to house, evading the Taliban killers who want them dead or abused or even raped. It's not good what they want for them. I want to give you just a reminder here of what happened, this airlift that happened. The majority of Afghan special immigrant visa applicants who aided U.S. forces, they did not safely exit Afghanistan before the Biden administration withdrew out of Afghanistan. This has been admitted now by the State Department, afterwards. They admitted this on Wednesday. And a very small percentage of the 120,000 people who were airlifted out of Afghanistan, which President Biden again says was a huge success, a very small percentage of those 120,000 were American citizens. Maybe 6,000 of them were. A few thousand more were Afghanis who helped, a few thousand. But the vast majority really seem to have been picked at random, while people who have been calling the State Department, working with the Department of Defense, were abandoned. There's no other way to put it. According to the gentleman I am about to speak with, this man's wife and child were trying to get out for several months. They were left behind. Why? Well, his name is Ali. I'm hiding his identity for his and his family's own protection. Ali, let's start from really the beginning here. You are pretty much in, it's not pretty much, you are totally in a dire situation where you have your wife and your son. You are an American citizen. Your wife and son are still in Afghanistan. Tell me what's going on.
Well, to put it simply, I married my wife in 2020. Shortly after, I flew back to the States after our wedding, and I put her paperwork in. So from that point in time, which was about September, I was, October is when I put her paperwork in after doing all the research on how to do it. I was begging the United USCIS, which is Department of Homeland Security, to expedite her case. So that's the first step. Then it goes to the Department of State after everything's cleared. So when it transferred to the Department of State, I was begging them to expedite the case. And they made it extremely difficult to contact. just to find the way to contact them took such a, it was very harrowing. So eventually I was able to contact them and they gave me emails. So I kept emailing them and they say, well, give it 3 weeks to, between emails for responses. So it would take about 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks to get a response. I kept begging them, please expedite my wife's case. She's pregnant. The child inside of her stomach is a United States citizen. I want you guys to help them because that kid is going to be born and he's a U.S. citizen. I don't want him to be born in Kabul. Now, keep in mind, because I'm a U.S. citizen, I was born and raised in California. It doesn't matter where my son is born. He could be born in Africa. He could be born anywhere in the world, and he would be a U.S. citizen. I was just trying to get them over here for their safety. So, he was born in May 28th of 2021. And shortly after, in June, June or July, I can't remember. There was an assassination attempt on my father-in-law. They shot inside of his house multiple times. My wife and son were in there. So obviously, I took this.
Let me ask you this real quickly. Why was your father-in-law a target?
My father-in-law is an arbitrator for a fee. He arbitrates any kind of disputes between governors or ministers of the previous Afghan government, all these guys that have now, fled. So, just at my wedding, there's about 800 people and about 100 and something, 110 of them were, they're all ministers and commanders that were at my wedding. They saw my face. I don't know where they're at now, but like, for example, the governor of Mazar, a bunch of these governors were there. So those are his friends, and he does business with them, resolving issues between them. So he's a prime target for anybody that hates the Afghan government to attack him, is what I'm saying.
And who hates the Afghan government? I would assume that would be the Taliban.
No. The previous Afghan government, Ashraf Ghani.
That's what I mean. Who would hate them most? The previous Afghan government. I'm sure the Taliban is not a big friend.
That's exactly it. And my father-in-law has spoken so openly about how much he hates the Taliban. He really hates them. And our family alone, there's generations of people that have fought the Taliban. Generations. Like two of my uncles, just two of my uncles are U.S. citizens. They enlisted as interpreters. So just two of my uncles over here. And, I have other family I can't talk about that fought against the Taliban. So, my uncle or my father-in-law as well is just, he's just another one. Politically, he speaks against the Taliban. He does not like him. Our family hates them. And he's good friends with the governors. And that's, he's a prime target.
Let's get this lay of the land here because I want our listeners and viewers to really, I'm sure many of them already understand, but let's remind them what's happening here because there's a very small percentage of the 120,000 people that were airlifted out of Afghanistan, which President Biden says was a huge success, by the way. A very small percentage of them were American citizens, maybe 6,000. Yep. A few thousand more out of that 120,000, a few thousand more were Afghanis who helped in some form or fashion or were friendly towards the United States, who may have been interpreters like you just mentioned. You have relatives who were, or who may have been like your dad, who have fought against your father-in-law, who fought against the Taliban. The vast majority that came over seemed to have been picked at random.
Yeah.
But your wife, which you described, have been trying to get them out there through the State Department, through the proper channels for months and months. Your wife and your child were trying to get out for a very long time. Yes. They were left behind. Why do you think that is?
I honestly have no clue. That's why I'm turning to the media. Why were my family left behind? Why, I was begging the embassy. We had no clue how anything would turn out. But obviously, way before, my father-in-law was a prime target. So my wife and child were always in danger. So I was begging the embassy. This is a U.S. citizen. He's your most helpless of the U.S. citizens. Like, why are you ignoring him? Basically, I was trying to get the message over. Don't you understand? And I was met with complete apathy by the Kabul embassy, and the Department of State would just wash their hands and say, "Well, it's up to the Kabul embassy of when to schedule it." So even when they expedited my wife's case eventually, they said, "Okay, you should hear within a couple days." I didn't hear for weeks about the expedite. August 14th, they expedited my wife's case. That was the day the embassy closed for her visa. And my son's CRBA, which is his consular report of birth abroad to get his U.S. birth certificate that he was born abroad, but he's a U.S. citizen, that was scheduled the 18th of August, along with his passport for his U.S. passport. So how's my wife and my child who's a U.S. citizen, how are they supposed to get their credentials to pass through when you guys ignored it up until the embassy closed?
Yeah, and they've been telling you that they need to go to the embassy. Correct. And it's
Yes,
closed.
that's the
It's closed at that point.
Yeah, exactly. So it's been so frustrating that the weakest of Americans, which is a 3-month-old baby that can't even speak for himself, we've done everything we can and still continue to do to try and get them out. And I see so many videos every day of the press conferences of Psaki saying, Biden saying, "Hey, we've been warning Americans so many times since March. You haven't, you have not, because, my son's an American and my wife is an IV applicant. Why haven't you been helping them? They've been trying. They haven't been ignoring anything. I've been here. We've been trying to get them out. You guys have literally abandoned them. So I'm trying to get the media to ask, why did you guys do this? Now my wife's immigrant visa status shows refused.
So they've actively refused her now on her immigrant status.
They're saying that it's processing, but I've been emailing the Department of State with absolutely no luck, along with the embassy, on what the next steps are. So
in the meantime, you're here in the States. You see Secretary of State Antony Blinken. He's downplaying the plight of those left behind, like your wife and your son, acting as if this is kind of normal protocol, like so many other countries where Americans need some assistance getting home, and maybe we can help them out like we do in other countries, like if you're stuck in Cancun or something like that. It's as if they're describing a completely different situation that's truly happening on the ground in Afghanistan. What is your specific message? Let's go right to the Secretary of State first. Antony Blinken, what do you want to say to him?
I want to say that, innocent people's lives aren't a public image stunt that you can downplay. You're completely abandoning these people and ignoring them. You're sweeping them under the rug while they're in extreme danger. We've had many pleas. What about, the innocent 3-month-old baby? How do you sleep easy at night?
President Biden now, he says there's going to be no more military intervention to rescue U.S. citizens and friendly Afghanis. He says rather he's going to work through diplomatic channels to negotiate the release, showing some type of respect for this new Afghan government, the Taliban that's in now oppressive power. There's a former congressman who's from the Detroit area. His name is Mike Rogers. He's an expert in these overseas foreign affairs issues, and he said right now, in reality, there's not going to be any diplomacy. That's a lie. There's the Taliban. The Taliban is actually valuing American citizens as this high commodity to be bargained with. And as far as the Afghanis who might have provided any support to the Americans, the Taliban, they simply want them dead. Would you agree with that assessment? And if so, what do you want Joe Biden, our president, your president, to know?
They've left tens of thousands of special immigrant visa people that have spent so long, just for the chance of being considered to go to the United States. What is that going to show to the rest of the world? You know what I mean? And then what about the citizens? Let's forget about that for a second. What about an innocent 3-month-old baby?
Yeah.
There's a huge story behind this. My family was stuck at the gates. They spent 8 days trying to get in. The Taliban would not let them in. Again, I blame the embassy, Department of State, the Biden administration, Psaki, and all those involved, including the Secretary of State. I blame them for, not having any kind of system to help Americans in Kabul. Because if they did, they would have given my wife something. I even explicitly said, please give my family, my wife and my child, something that I can fly them out and finish their last step here instead of keeping them in Kabul. I said that beforehand, and I have emails of it. Like I said, their lives were always in danger. So they just ignored it. They did no, just complete apathy for the weakest of Americans, which is an innocent 3-month-old baby. So I'm sorry. It's just very, very sad. It's very upsetting that they're in that situation because they weren't given any credentials like other Americans that would come to Afghanistan with passports. And so the Taliban kept turning them away. That e-visa was worthless. They did not accept that e-visa that they issued. They didn't even have a name. As a matter of fact, my uncle with a 1-year-old daughter who has this case with the embassy was given that e-visa. And when they got through the gates of the airport to the soldiers, they turned them away.
Who turned them away? The American soldiers?
Yeah, they turned them away. After days in the heat, Taliban, they shoot guns in the air and those bullets come down and they kill people, and they're shooting over people and they're pointing guns at people's head. They pointed guns at my wife's head with my child in her arms. And, they were shooting above her and she was just covering my child. And they even tried to strike at my child multiple times. At one point,
this is the Taliban you're talking about.
Yes. Yeah. Who else? That's them. That's how they are. That's their MO. They're extremely cruel. And this is why nobody likes them. Nobody accepts them. Oh, the Afghan people wholly reject the Taliban. We want our women to be able to be anything, including doctors, soldiers. That's what we want for them. We don't want them to be at home. And they took all that away, all of the progress. They took away our art. They took away our music.
Mm-hmm.
It's just ridiculous. I mean, 40 years of war the Afghans have gone through. They want these things. They need these things. This is their rights. This is their basic human rights. Religion is beautiful and all. You can't force people to abide by a strict religious way of life. That is completely a personal matter. Mm-hmm. You cannot run a government like that, and so that's what they're trying to do. And it's just absolutely unacceptable. So that's how cruel they are. And it's not surprising. And I would caution any nations or people that listen to this to keep the maximum pressure on the Taliban at all times. Unfortunately, now they have, that foothold, keep pressure on them. Do not turn your eyes away. Keep the media presence on them so they don't start killing a lot of people, because that's how they were doing it at the airport. They're shooting, they're pointing. I mean, what kind of people, point loaded guns at an innocent woman's head, small framed woman with a 3-month-old baby in her hands and try and strike at her? The Taliban do.
I listen and I watch the president, your president, my president, Biden, speak about the Taliban and Jen Psaki doing the same thing. And they refer to them as this new government that we're going to have to cooperate with and work with and negotiate with. Do you feel, as I do, that there is this now suddenly this softening of the perspective of who the Taliban really are? And that's being projected onto Americans. And maybe some Americans are saying, well, maybe the Taliban are different than they were 20 years ago. Maybe it's a different type of people. Maybe they are going to be more inclusive. And that's the message that I feel is trying to be portrayed by this president and the administration. But it's not an accurate representation of who they are. Are you sensing that they're trying to soften the image of the Taliban?
That seems to be the attitude. I think that because there are so many special immigrant visa holders and so many American citizens, firstly, that are left behind, I think that they're trying to downplay the thing that they could easily, be considered hostages. They're basically completely hostages. So that's not a good, it's just image for them. So it's not a good image for the Biden administration to basically, say that, okay, 120,000 people, how could you not get all the Americans out? And what about the special immigrant visas? How, stuff like that. So it's just an image thing. I caution everybody never to trust the Taliban at face. So yeah,
Practically speaking here, and I do not want you to give details
yeah,
because I care about your plight, and a lot of people do. I would say the majority of the people care about what you're going through, and especially the more we're learning about the reality on the ground there. But as we hear from people like former Congressman Mike Rogers, there are private enterprises, people trying to orchestrate these private rescue missions. He says that he's working with Afghanis to help them through these Taliban checkpoints to get them to the northern part of the country where they can potentially be rescued or airlifted out of there. Are you hearing that type of thing as a potential option, some type of private mission to get your wife and child out of there?
so it's one thing to get American children and families out, that are stranded there for one reason or another. They couldn't get out. But it's another thing for somebody like my father-in-law, to and because my wife is completely traumatized. She keeps shaking. She's been through 8 days in the heat. I almost lost my baby to heat stroke, and they had to leave. So this isn't like this is days and days in 100 something degree weather, an innocent 3-month-old baby. And they're stuck, on the ground waiting to get in. The Taliban detains them, it beats them, points guns at them, fires over their heads where those bullets can come down. So my point is that, even if those private rescue missions, my my father-in-law is a high value target. So how is he supposed to get through those checkpoints when they're looking for him? Why they have to keep bouncing around, their houses, their hideouts in Kabul. They can't stay in one place for too long because they keep going door to door looking for people. So how are they supposed to be able to safely escort them out? Any kind of rescue operation would be a huge kind of like risk to take them and try to get them through. How are you going to do that?
Yeah, and this is your wife's dad, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so she obviously doesn't want to leave him behind. Um,
Well, she's on her own. Like she can barely walk. She's in bad shape. She's traumatized. She's shaking. She lost 30 pounds in a couple of weeks. So she can barely move, and she has nowhere else to go. So how is she going to go anywhere, by herself and with my child? And I've almost lost them many times already, for trying to get them out. Just they kept running into Taliban checkpoints. And they kept bashing at their windows, shooting in the air, and turning them around. And luckily none of them recognized my father-in-law, amid all the chaos. So if they do recognize them, I don't know what they'll do, and I don't know what they'll do to my wife and child. You know.
we have a feckless State Department. They're completely, I think the word apathy is correct, but I think it's even more sinister than that. You had mentioned in our previous conversation, and you touched on this in this conversation about the months that you have spent trying to get your wife back to the states and your child to the states,
Yeah.
working with the State Department, who seemed very apathetic, and you spent weeks and weeks. It's like being on hold with a telecommunications company where you go through all these channels and the wait time is, for you, 5-6 weeks. We get
Yeah.
upset about a 24-minute wait. For you, it's different because you're speaking about life and death.
Yes.
They said to you, is what you relayed to me at the time, that when you said, listen, there's the Taliban are starting to take over certain areas, maybe
Yeah.
certain towns and villages and cities. And we're now in an emergency situation here. And they actually said to you, correct me if I'm wrong, but, well, we need evidence of that.
Yeah.
Is that true? The
Well,
State Department, wouldn't they know about this?
well, no. So here, obviously, I was always when it comes to the State Department, because all the times I've called, they've said, "Well, you need to prove that there's a humanitarian issue." So what I would do is I would get articles or newspaper blogs that are written about what's going on in Kabul, and all the violence and all the danger. And this is months before anything like this happened. And I would get those articles and paste them to the email. right? So I'm always monitoring the news. So as things are like getting worse and worse, I'm just sending them updates like, hey, this is what I see in the news. This is what's going on. This situation is getting more and more dire. So I don't exactly know how things were turning out at that time. It was mainly when they tried to assassinate my father-in-law. I sent them pictures of the bullet entry holes into the house. I sent them pictures of my baby. I was like, they shot into this house. We don't know exactly who, but somebody's trying to kill my father-in-law. And that's even worse that we don't know who. It could be anybody. It could be some enemies of his, or it could have been Taliban. Who knows? But my point is that my wife and U.S. citizen child is in there. They didn't even acknowledge it. They don't care. They threw more red tape and said, well, we need these documents and this. And I had all of the documents as well. I still do have all of them. They made me mail the original documents, which takes weeks via DHL. They were in absolutely no rush to help, and they really didn't care. That's the Kabul embassy. That's the Department of State. It's very, very saddening.
You mentioned your wife is and your baby trying, and your father-in-law. I'm sure about his situation if they're all together or not. I don't want you to tell me that, but the reality is you got to move from safe house to safe house, bunker to bunker, whatever it is, because the Taliban are going door to door. When the Taliban, when they go door to door, the reports we're getting is that there are some brutal killings happening on the spot if they find someone or something in that particular home that they would disagree with. It could be maybe a religious item. It could be the fact that they found somebody who was friendly towards the United States. Is that really happening? I mean, we hear these, we watch these videos where we hear the sound of machine gun fire, and they're claiming that these are executions happening on the spot. Is that really happening?
So as far as that's concerned, I don't know about the executions and stuff, but I wouldn't be surprised one bit. This is it. This is how the Taliban is. They're brutal, they're cruel, and they're very inhumane. But I do know that they were asking and looking for my father-in-law. So the fact that they're looking, for my father-in-law is very telling.
Yeah.
And my father-in-law's neighbor. Yeah, sorry. My father-in-law's neighbors actually sold out their location at their first house. So
they did what?
They sold out their location out of fear. They sold their location out.
You mean your father-in-law's location? Is that what you mean?
Yes. So at the first house of my father-in-law's, his neighbors sold out his location. So they all had to move to, just very quickly move.
They did that out of fear?
Yeah.
So you can't really trust anybody.
No, especially not somebody like him. Like, as far as like, he can't trust anybody, and people know his face. So, especially somebody like, he has to stay inside. He's, they're hidden. Like, they cannot go outside.
Ali, I got to ask you this. Ali, what's your hope here? What do you want people to know that you believe will provide some help for you, your wife, and your child?
If they could mention my name and start emailing, the State Department, they can start emailing the Kabul embassy. They could start asking, if the media could start asking questions to the Biden administration, Secretary of State, why are there still Americans? Why is there a 3-month-old American? And why are you guys constantly saying, trying to, fix your image? And, why are you guys constantly saying, well, Americans were warned and they didn't get out? What about this situation? Why have you abandoned what it seems like you've abandoned, this innocent 3-month-old U.S. citizen child that can't speak for himself? It's very easy for them to say they decided not to leave. Well, what about this situation? I've been begging for help until the very last second, until the U.S. troops left. And there was never any help. There's a separate situation there. Days after, I was trying to get my wife through to the airport, and they just couldn't get to the gates. They kept getting turned away and harassed, beaten, shot over. I called the Department of State to that task force that they very quickly assembled, and I got contacts from the Department of Defense. That was a nightmare, the Department of Defense, because multiple people contacted my family and myself, and they kept dropping coordinates. And they kept promising that they would get them all to safety, that they would get them buses to get picked up. Multiple times, I need this to be very clear, multiple times, my family would go, to a location, typically in front of hotels, and they would wait there from before the meeting time, which would be in the morning, until late at night, and no buses ever came for them. And they would be sitting ducks. This happened multiple times. When my family would call those contacts, there's 5 or 6 different contacts. They would tell them to go home and wait for further instruction. Out of desperation, because there was nobody else to help, we had to keep listening to them. In one day, I sent it to 4 or 5 different locations, one being at an airport gate where they were 800 meters away, and they were guaranteed somebody would come open the gates or pick them up. 800 meters away from one gate, Kasaba Gate is one of them. Nobody did. Then they sent it to a place called Panjshir gas station in Kabul. This is after this ISIS attack. So the threat level was as high as it gets. And one of the contacts of the DOD said the threat is a vehicle IED, and they sent it to a gas station, right? So they're out in the open waiting for 12, 13 hours up until late at night. There wasn't a lot of people. All of them that were there were waiting to get picked up by buses, which never came. One of the contacts stated they were making special, basically for my wife, they were making special answers, what is your favorite, animal, cat, right? So he was basically saying an American citizen woman will link up with my wife, take her and the baby to a gate inside the airport to safety. And basically nobody came. It was actually a man that called, and a man came, and we'll call him Jared. Jared came. So firstly, it was nothing like they said. And this Jared guy, I told my family to make sure that, he is actually who he says he is. And he was a U.S. citizen affiliated with the DOD. And he didn't take them. He just stayed with them. So they were there at that gas station with the Jared guy now, who's a U.S. citizen, and with the DOD. And they're all together waiting, with a vehicle IED threat at a gas station. So they were there for about 14, 15 hours until night. And nobody came. No buses came. They promised that buses would be there. And buses never, buses were never there. They promised the previous time as well. They promised multiple times that wherever they would be at, they would get help. So the trust has already been eroded, but out of desperation, we were listening to them verbatim, their instructions. And then they suddenly changed it and said, okay, well, we got to move you guys to Southgate. So I had my family go to Southgate through the Taliban checkpoints. And, unfortunately at night, especially the Taliban are extremely aggressive, especially. So as soon as they saw my family, they started they're bashing in their car windows. They shot up in the air, and they basically were pointing their guns at them and saying, you cannot move forward from here. So this Jared guy, that's with the DOD, that the DOD sent, deserted them.
He got left. He
left. He just left. He got up and said, sorry, I can't do anything for you. And the insult is they said that he took other families with them. He left. Yeah. So that's just one situation. The other situation has been just a mess with the DOD contacting, and 5 or 6, different people from the DOD just contacting and promising help, dropping coordinates. They'll be waiting there for 12, 13 hours in the heat and not getting any buses. The most insulting thing was the DOD was saying, well, go into the civilian side. At this point, this was near the end. The civilian side was overrun by the Taliban. They're asking my family to go to civilian side. My wife and kid, they were well aware that my wife and son did not have U.S. credentials because the embassy closed. And I was begging the embassy. But my point is they were well aware of their situation. They didn't have U.S. credentials. The Taliban kept turning them away. And they're asking them to go into the civilian side where it was only Taliban overrun. And I said, they're going to kill them. They can't. My wife is trembling. She's dying. My son is dying. I've almost lost him 5 times. So they had to turn around and flee. And as he was turning around, my brother-in-law recorded a video of buses going from safe places in Kabul. He recorded me a video and sent it and said, look at all these buses. that they're coming from safe places in Kabul and taking them all to the airport. How come you couldn't get us one? They promised us many times and they let us down. And these multiple contacts, they each promised that they would take all of them and help all of them, and they never came for buses. Buses never came for them. So,
and they had the resources, they had the buses,
yes,
and we've also seen empty planes as
yes,
well. There's planes where people could
yes,
have gotten out.
yes,
You've been led along this seemingly just totally fruitless journey, and it seems almost purposeful.
yes,
Like they're trying and eventually trying to goat her into this Taliban
yes,
overrun area where it was obviously one of the most unsafe places that she and your son could go to.
yes,
Meanwhile, these buses are going from safe house, apparently
yeah,
rescuing other people.
yeah.
Is there any indication? Are you just totally confused right now? You have no idea why you are being treated this way and others are not?
I'm completely confused, completely at a loss for understanding. Like, is this just pure incompetence? Because again, the complication is they don't have their U.S. credentials, and the embassy is already closed.
Yeah, you can't.
So that they can't show anything to say that we're American.
Mm.
You know, so there's another fact that after that assassination attempt on my father-in-law back in June, he sent his passports with my family's, including my wife's, their Afghan passports to the Turkish embassy to get a visa to get out. And the embassy was processing it at the time that they closed. The Turkish embassy closed, so they didn't even have their Afghan passports. They had the copies of them. They didn't have the original ones. However, I sent the Department of State and other departments and other many contacts all of the information in one nice PDF with all of the relevant information of their passport numbers and all of their documents. So they had it. So it's not like this was, something chaotic that they were adjusting to. This was organized paperwork that I was preparing, from my end for all of them. So they knew exactly who everybody was. And it wasn't like, obviously, my wife and son, obviously my wife is known. She's an applicant for an immigrant visa, and my son is a U.S. citizen. But my uncle, through my mom is a U.S. citizen and my grandma's a green card holder, my uncle was with that group, with my wife and son, that group. And he had his own pass, and he was turned away already from the airport, and he was with them. So he was known already in the system, and all of his documents were there with them. And my brother-in-law, he's the father of a U.S. citizen child and a green card holder, a woman. So it's not like they're just random. They all have their cases with the U.S. embassy, with the exception of my father-in-law and a couple of his kids. So
we, in fact, you are a prime example. Your family has honestly been left behind by the
yes,
American government.
yeah,
They've been left behind. They've been.
yep.
So, all right. So we're not going to leave you behind. I'm actually taking a real personal stance on this because this matters. You matter. Your wife and child matter. Your father-in-law matter. These are real people. These are
Yes.
human beings. Whom the government portrays. Joe Biden, the White House, the administration, Jen Psaki has said this, Anthony Blinken, that they care about human beings, that they are the compassionate ones. And here's a
Nope.
prime example of how their actions are not meeting their words.
Nope.
And they do need to be held accountable. But more importantly than that, your wife and your child and your father-in-law need to be rescued, need to be pulled out of Afghanistan, and they need to be brought home to you. So we're going to keep doing this with you, Ali, as long as it takes. And hopefully that's soon rather than late. And
Thank you. I
will
only,
stay in contact.
I just want to note that only my wife and son, I want obviously them to come to the United States. Everybody else, I just want them on a plane out of Kabul anywhere. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like my father-in-law is self-sufficient, so he'll go anywhere and start a business. But my wife and son, I want them with me in the US. They're trying to get out. They tried, they did everything until the last second, where they were asking them to go to the Taliban and they couldn't. The Taliban were beating out their windows and shooting above. So yes, I just wanted to note that my wife and son is coming obviously to the US with me, but
Yeah.
at this point, with the refusal of that visa, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm just trying to get the credentials so when the airport opens up, I can come and they can be, get out, So, you know what I mean? It's just frustrating because even if the airport opens up, how am I supposed to get them out with the embassy closed and they don't have their credentials?
Right. Well,
So,
we're going to go around some other channels, it looks like. And there are some people out there that want to help.
yeah,
So we're going to try to tap you into those people, because clearly the government has let you down time and time again. It wasn't just the evacuation attempt, it was the multiple setups and the stand ups that you were stood up. Your wife was stood up over and over again, by
yeah,
the government. And it's a shame that this happened.
yes,
Ali, I
yes.
can't thank you enough for your time.
Thank,
We're going to stand with you throughout this entire process. Thank you.
thanks.